Right, you're still awake then, just. Yeah, hang on, wrong button. That button, yes, right, this is me, you know me. Carlton Gibson, GitHub, Foster Dom, I've got a website, do a podcast with him. Go check that out. For those of you who don't know me, between 2018 and 2023, I was one of the Django Fellows. Now, I don't have to tell you what Django Fellows are because Natalia did that this morning. The bottom line is that after 5 years of being the fellow, I stepped down to get back to building things with Django rather than working on Django. So since 2023 and ongoing, I've been working on an application called Paths, which is monitoring, evaluation, and learning for development and sustainability projects. That's the Uber for development and sustainability projects. I meant to say that we're hiring, but we're not hiring yet. We're busy bootstrapping. We're a year and a half in, and it's all going very well, but this next year is going to be the one that tells whether it sticks. So if we get through that, then yes, we might be hiring. So perhaps talk to me at DjangoCon 2025, and we'll see about that. Today's talk is called API Maybe. It's about bootstrapping an application circa 2024, specifically our application. In 2018, when I started fellowing, I was working on DRF, Django REST Framework, and the world was very definitely API first. It was maybe even API only. You'd work on a team with a very clear division between the back end that was built by one group of folks, and then they would expose a REST-like JSON API, and then the front end, which would be built by a totally different group of people, would consume that with whatever JavaScript framework of the moment. And that was quite often the API's only client. Now, you might be sat there at the back going, hang on, it's still exactly like that. But spin forward to 2024, and things have changed a bit. Largely in response to the seemingly ever more complexity in front end, we've seen a return to a focus on rendering HTML on the server and the emergence of a family of related front end frameworks that go under the monkey of HTML over the wire. Now, HTMX is the one that's probably got most of the mindshare in the Django community, but we've had plenty of talks on that this week, right? But Turbo, Unpoly, and others are doing similar things in a very similar vein. But something else changed between 2018 and 2024 as well, which was where did all the money go? The great inflation that followed the pandemic, the global supply chain crisis, and the Russian invasion of Ukraine marked the end of the zero interest rate environment we'd, let's say, enjoyed in the decade or so since the last financial crisis. You've all felt it. Tech layoffs are in the news every week, it seems. But what that means is you can't just go out and pick up a big bag of cash to pay for a multidisciplinary team to build up your app from day one. On Paths, we have a very limited budget. We've had tight milestones, like 12 weeks to get from idea to proof of concept, another 12 weeks to make that into an MVP that clients could actually use, a few months only to flesh out the supporting bits like versioning and role-based permissions and all those other things. And then so we didn't have cash for a big team. It was just literally me on the technical side. And there's no way that I could do all of that if I'd had to take on Django and a big front-end framework like React, right? So my contention is that by leaning into Django, you can get just as much done as bigger teams using more complex stacks, and that Django really shines exactly when the money is tight. Django has always been the framework for perfectionists with deadlines. When those deadlines are financial, all the more so. Django is the perfect web framework for our post-zero interest rates world. But first, well, I just want to talk about something called locality of behavior. This is an idea from the creator of HTMX, Carlton Gibson. Locality of behavior is a way of thinking about and assessing code. Some code has locality of behavior when everything you need to understand that code is there in front of you in one place. The contrast is when you need to go and have a look somewhere else to see what the behavior is going to be. The idea is that other things being equal, greater locality of behavior makes your code easier to reason about, easier to maintain, and easier to iterate on. Now again, you'll be familiar with this. Tailwind CSS is a utility-first CSS framework that's very popular. It gives you utility classes that you embed in your HTML to control your styling, rather than needing to keep that code in a separate CSS file. Alpine.js is a rugged little jQuery-like JavaScript framework that lets you define your component behaviors, again in your HTML, rather than in a separate JavaScript file. And of course, HTMX adds a small set of HTML attributes that expand the native powers of HTML, all again without leaving your HTML. Karen, Chris, Josh, and others have talked about these tools already in this conference. On top of those behaviors, both in the name of locality behavior, I've suggested Neapolitan, which is my take on quick CRUD views for Django, and Django template partials, which adds reusable name template fragments to the Django template language. I suggested that particularly with new code, while you're still working on it, whilst it's in flux, a focus on locality of behavior can help you go faster. But I think we need to put up some disclaimers about locality of behavior. Let's be 100% clear. Locality of behavior is a starting point, not a destination. If I've got a button styled with Tailwind, I'm not going to mindlessly copy and paste those classes every time I need a button. I might stick the HTML in a partial or in a template tag, but much more likely I'm just going to pull all those classes into my CSS file and create a new button utility as anybody would obviously do. Alpine.js is awesome. A one-line handler in your HTML file, beautiful. 2 lines, no problem. At any given moment, one more line of JavaScript in your HTML file is not a problem. But at some point, and probably quite soon, you're going to pull your JavaScript out into a separate file or into an Alpine plugin so that you can use it with just an attribute declaration on your HTML. You're going to get linting, formatting, testing, and all the rest of it. Right? That was what Karen was talking about yesterday. You're going to use your judgment as to when you sacrifice a bit of locality of behavior as your code scales to gain in maintainability. If you're using Neapolitan's CRUD view, you might see that, oh yes, this logic would be better now as a separate view, and so on. Locality of behavior doesn't mean that we abandon the good engineering practices that we've learned since we were juniors. It's a tool, not an end in itself. Right? Just a moment. I like water when I'm talking. But I will say, holding the line on locality of behavior can really pay dividends. Dry, separation of concerns, yeah, sure. But for every one of those, there's a write it twice and a 3 times refactor. As I was writing this talk, Luke Plant published a nice post comparing these programming mantras to proverbs. They're great when they apply, but for every one of them, there's always a contradictory one if you need to pull it out. Right? Again, we need to be sensitive with these things. A principle that I learned as a junior was called protected variations. The idea was that you identify areas of your code that are subject to change, and then you build a stable interface around them so that as they evolve, they don't interact with everything else while they're changing. Well, new code, when you're still working on it, when it's still in flux, when you don't really know what it's going to look like, that's the perfect example of code that is likely to change. By focusing on locality of behavior, by keeping everything together, you make sure that any changes don't escape out of that file or out of that module. If it looks like you're repeating yourself, you're violating dry, but then you extract the code somewhere and you reuse it, when you realize that it needs to change, that there's something you hadn't accounted for, well, you've got multiple changes to fix now, multiple places to fix. You've violated protected variations. On the other hand, if you can just defer extracting that bit of code slightly, focusing on locality behavior, you allow the code to stabilize. This means less churn, but it also buys you more time to find the deeper patterns, let them emerge in your code. Quickly refactoring to dry code is all very well and good, but it can be a premature optimization. It can lead your code getting kind of stuck in a local optima. Buying the space for those patterns to emerge is for me one of the greatest payoffs of thinking about locality of behavior. I think it's really interesting to think about how far we can or should push locality of behavior when building our apps. I think that's a discussion. I think it's case by case, app by app, team by team. But from where I'm standing, it's super exciting. Okay. So, leaning into Django or API maybe. Bootstrapping an application circa 2024. Django has a grain. It wants you to do things a certain way. And the tip here is, well, go with it, right? So I just want to quickly run you through some of the tools that I've been using, how I've been thinking about using Django in the last year and a half. So we start off, we've got a model and a view, and I've been using Neapolitan's CRUD view. To quote Will Vincent, 90% of every app is basic CRUD operations. So last year, I introduced Neapolitan, which is my take on quick CRUD views for Django. I have to say, I couldn't be happier. Apart from the odd template view, Neapolitan has totally replaced my use of the generic class-based views from Django. So let me show it to you. I have a model, just a simple bookmark model there. It's got a URL, a title, and a little note, and a Boolean field for whether it's a favorite or not. I want to get it on screen. So in my urls.pile here, I import Neapolitan's CRUD view, and I just define it. I say what model it's going to use. I say what fields I want it to show, and I say I want to be able to filter on whether it's a favorite or not. Then I just add it to my URL patterns there, and that's it. It's ready to go. Neapolitan's CRUD view provides the standard list, detail, create, edit, and delete views for a model, as well as the hooks you're going to need to be able to customize any part of that. Neapolitan provides base templates and reusable templates tags to make getting your model on the page as easy as possible. Where you take your app after that is up to you, but Neapolitan will get you started. The key point for me is that your code lives in a single class. It's all right in front of you. As we said, maybe you get to the point where you break it out into a separate view, but in general, you're going to go a long way before you need to do that. In the meantime, you've got a working space. You've got the working space that you want to allow your code to develop in a kind of controlled environment. CRUD view itself is just a single class. It pulls all the familiar APIs from Django's generic class-based views, get form, get query state, get context data, and so on. All those methods that you're used to, but it's got them into one place, in one file. With Neapolitan, I'm never asking myself, oh, where's that implemented? Oh, where's that overridden? I don't need a separate website just to look up where my method is defined. Right? It makes a big difference. I'm having massive fun with it, and I recommend it to you. Do go and check it out. Then the second bit is, we've got a model and we've got views, but we're going to send HTML using Django templates. In a way, I don't have too much to say about this thing, right? Just send HTML. Like, what more do you want? But that's the whole payoff of moving away from API-first development. You're not creating serializers and then building your HTML in a whole separate stack, but you're doing it there and then in your Django. After a decade of not really pushing to the limits of templates, I've hardly been using them for a decade, right? I'm rediscovering them. What's built in is great, and over the last year, I've lost count of the number of times I've gone to the docs, searching for something, found it right there, and just been able to use it. But then writing your own template tags is easy and powerful, if perhaps a little under-documented. On top of that, though, the ecosystem is really exciting at the moment. So what's been mentioned this week? Django Unicorn, Django Components, Slippers, Django Cotton. They've all been called out. Adam Hill of Django Unicorn fame has just put out DJ Angles or Jangles, which is another take on this custom components in Django's idea. Josh Thomas and Adam were plotting on Mastodon last week to bring us component islands. Well, I don't even know what that means, but it sounds really exciting. So who knows where this is going? The point is, it's a really vibrant time. And as I stand here now, who would have imagined back in 2018 we'd be so excited about Django templates? And then the other big tool, of course, is HTMX and template partials. This was the change. Pushing HTMX, it gets us a long way. It's worth looking at all the extensions. I'll just say that now. On the HTMX website, there's this long list of extensions, extra things you can do. I don't know, you want to put up a toast, one of these alert toasts. It's got a remove extension that will take it out after a few seconds. You don't have to build that yourself. It's just free. So do check those out. I'll just quickly introduce HTMX because it's been mentioned so many times this week. You get a button. It's got these attributes. What's going to happen there? You all know. You click the button. It will replace whatever comes back in the template. The point is that everything's there and it's all in one file. On top of that, I added Django template partials. And this was an idea, again, from the HTMX website. You've got a full template, and you only want to render a small part of it when you get back. So you've got a bookmark list, and you just want to get a single bookmark, the bit for a single bookmark back, where you can wrap that in a partial and pull that back. You can do that with Django templates anyway. You can put that into an include tag, but it kind of does two things. One, that's a bit heavyweight, and two, it breaks your flow because you've suddenly got the detailed bit for the bookmark in a totally separate file. So again, it's this idea of locality of behavior. Let me just quickly show you to you if you haven't seen it. First of all, you load the partials tag, and then you use a partial def to create some reusable bit that you're going to want to use. And then later on, somewhere else, you can use that, and you call it by name there. And you can just go, look, I want to put my great reusable bit in there, so I just go partial great bit, and it appears. That's the worst example. I should improve it. With that in place, you can just change the template name in your view. And, here I'm just going, like, okay, that's the bit. And you can add the hashtag at the end to the great bit, and the template loader will knows to go and find the template, looks to see if it can find the template like normal. If it finds the template, it will look to see if that partial is defined. And if the partial isn't defined, it will raise a template not found like you used to. The point is that it's as transparent to your view layer as can be. You're still using the standard response, the standard flow, request response flow, and you're returning a basic template response like you always have. So for me, the combination of HTMX and template partials has been really powerful. It effectively lets me stay in the one template file with one view class supporting that for much longer than it was possible to do before. This is a real productivity boost. You can simply get more done. You can tidy it up, and again, you can tidy it up later once the structure becomes apparent. And then so finally, I just wanted to mention Alpine.js that Karen, again, was talking about yesterday. It's lightweight. It only weighs a few kilobytes. So if you're just doing one thing, like one simple widget once, well, just use vanilla.js. But if you're going to use Alpine, or if you're going to do this all over your site, those few kilobytes buy you an awful lot. You get state management, reactivity, all sorts of great things. You get good bang for your buck. It's easy to use. It's just a simple script tag. And it's another one of these locality behavior things. So it looks kind of like this. Here, again, even if you don't know this, we define a component with a count there, and we output the count in the paragraph tag there with the X tag, and on the click event, we'll just increment the count. It does exactly what you think it does, and it's all just there in front of you. For me, I think it's the closest I've been to jQuery in a long time. There was this bit, I don't know, a long time ago. It was beautiful, just a bit of jQuery. And that all went away, and Alpine brings that back. Anyway. So I just want to come back then to forms. How does that, for me, forms are the missing link, right? They play this dual role between being a data sanitation layer and then presenting the UI. And you can make it pretty and you can do all those things, but as soon as you start doing JavaScript again, you're worried, oh no, am I going to have to start writing serializers? Am I going to have to duplicate everything I've done in my form logic? No, you're not. JavaScript has got a form data object. So instead of sending JSON back, you can, with Alpine.js, you can configure a form data object. And then you can dispatch an event from your Alpine component and have something listen to it, which uses HTMX to dispatch the request to the browser, which then gives back Alpine.js enhanced HTML, which you then inject back into your document with the HTMX swap mechanisms. Doing that, you never have to do this sort of double step into JavaScript land or into JSON land and then writing back HTML. There are some tricks. There's some lifestyle bits. You need to call next tick with Alpine to make sure that the DOM is settled before you try and update the Alpine. You need to call maybe HTMX prepare, or you need to call Alpine init tree sometimes to get the life cycle. But those are really workable, and they're much simpler than having to reconstruct the HTML in your template. So for me, it's gone a really long way. That combination has enabled us to get what I think as a genuinely viable product, a GVP. The next year is going to tell whether we manage to get from this bootstrapped GVP position to fully sustainable, but the combination of HTMX, Alpine, Tailwind, Django with Neapolitan, I really recommend it to you. Looking forward, I just want to wrap up by saying that talk about three things that are on our roadmap. The first is async and collaborative editing. Everything we've built so far is done on sync code only. That's as it should be. Sync code is much simpler, order of magnitude simpler than async code, and it's easier to maintain. Most of our app is edited only by one person, but then they do a review meeting where the first thing they do is all open up the laptops, all open up the same project, all at the same time, and we need things to be synced. I don't have too much to say of that. I'm going to go home, study Ken's talk in a lot of detail, and then I'll have more to say on that. The thing I would like to do is upstream some of that back to the Django admin. It's one of the longest standing complaints about the admin that it doesn't handle the multi-user environment. You've got a big list editable table. You're busy editing away and someone comes in underneath you and makes an edit and you click save and then your work's all lost. The second one is performance and latency. Paths is hosted in AWS's Paris region, but our user base is distributed everywhere from Kenya to Vietnam to Bangladesh to China and beyond. As such, performance is key. Most users are office-based. We don't really have mobile phones and poor network connections to worry about. Something's on the radar, we'd like to get out of the office, but it's not a pressing need now. But the latency to China is still significant. We've done the basics. I don't think we've pushed even half the buttons yet. Most of our operations are reads, so heavy caching on the ORM and template rendering will go an awful long way. Maybe we need some edge processing, I don't know, a little outpost in Nairobi or Shanghai. I don't know. The point is that at the high level, the latency problem is precisely where we were all meant to move to think of to rich clients and SPAs in the first place. Supposedly, smaller package sizes from shipping JSON to the client rather than HTML would lead to better performance. With the modern web, we've seen that that isn't the case. Bundle sizes are so big that pages remain unresponsive for an age. It's actually slower for the browser to convert JSON back to HTML on the client than it is just to accept HTML in the first place. So I have to say, I don't know where we're going to end up with this performance and latency issue, but it's quite exciting. What I can say is that whatever we do will be based on user needs, it will be based on evidence, and we will grow into it. We're not going to just default to doing anything simply because that was what Facebook felt like they needed a decade ago. The final thing I want to mention then is integrations, because of course we're going to need an API for integrations. Folks want to plug their data into Power BI or whatever it is that they're using, but the shape of this is really different from a REST API powering your application. What folks want is a read-only endpoint for a CSV on a subset of their data. They don't want like the full whatnot. And with Neapolitan's CRUD view, you've already got auth and you've already got filtering and all the rest. So you just add a little extra handler onto the CRUD view, and that gives you your CSV that they need for that thing. Right? It's not the same beast at all as what we were talking about. So let me just put up this one to finish. I've stepped down from the fellow role in order to get back to building things with Django rather than just working on it. I'll say again, I'm having the time of my life. In 2018, I never expected web to swing back Django's direction. The thought then was, oh, well, should we merge DRF into core? Which I know Jeff's got thoughts on. I think that moment's gone. Right? Maybe in 2018 we should have done it, but we didn't. I think that moment's gone. There are too many exciting things happening around APIs now for us to take what's probably a dated solution and crown it, right? But the point is that's kind of moot, because I hope you've seen it, if we lean into Django, it's not even a question that you need to think about until you get well out of the gate. So an API, well, maybe. That's...
Thank you, Carlton. Times have most certainly changed. We've got a few minutes for questions. Any out there?
Come on, Daniel. Come on, let's have it.
I really love the idea that by being a little bit conservative, we've avoided, we could have ended up with cryptocurrency mining and ChatGPT built into the core of Django if we had a slightly different attitude.
So we've Simon a week longer, we might.
So we've saved ourselves from some missteps by doing that. But the arc of history is really quite long, and even 10 years is not that long. I wonder if you're willing to look even further into the future than you've looked into the past and suggest where this might be going.
Well, the bottom line is we can't know, right? The future is unknowable. But I've been thinking about this since you asked a related question in Vigo about this. I think the problem we have to solve now is what, to paraphrase someone much cleverer than me, we would call kernel Django plus batteries plus installable batteries. So packaging isn't the issue it once was. So why can't we do everything in plugins, in third-party packages, in things that we can pip install? Pip is easy and reliable and whatnot, but we can't maintain the massive battery pack of every possible option we want, and we can't experiment in Django either, right? So but the trouble is, if we just have kernel Django, there's this whole ecosystem, which is our superpower. It's one of Django's absolute best resources, is the packaging environment, but nobody knows what to pip install. So somewhere between batteries included, it's all in Django, but we can't maintain it, and a kernel Django with a mystery land, there must be a happy story where we can recommend to people 20, 30, 40 packages which are reliable, cover most cases, and give them guidance into the deeper ecosystem. Then I don't think we have to try and be crystal ball predictors, because we can experiment in, as Simon was talking about, a plugin based or a third-party way without risk to the core kernel Django. That would be my kind of thought. I don't know how we do that, but that's where I'm leaning to.
Okay, well, thank you very much,
Okay,
Carlton.
brilliant.